Alright, today we are going over the causes of World War I, the Great War. Very briefly, we are going to hit the causes using the acronym MARINA. That is militarism, alliances, relatives, imperialism, nationalism, and Arab oil. So if you only write down one thing, write down MARINA and those keywords. Militarism is first. At this time, the major powers in Europe were engaged in an arms race. From German unification in 1871, when those 300 states and kingdoms were unified, Germany started compiling its military, its empire's military. And from the mid-1890s, Wilhelm II used the industrial and economic power of Germany to create the Imperial German Navy, to rival the British Royal Navy. Between 1908 and 1913, military spending in Europe increased by 50%. New weapons were being developed that would be used in the war. Tanks, poisonous gas, which was considered uncivilized prior to World War I, long-barreled howitzers, like the one we see in this picture. This is a medium howitzer which was used by the British during World War I. And howitzers were used because they were better able to strike targets in trenches. They had a steep angle of ascent and descent, so they could hit those targets during the trench warfare, unlike guns. Grenades were also really widely developed, and a lot of different grenades were used during the war. Our next cause is alliances. 19th century Europe was characterized by a balance of power. Otto von Bismarck negotiated the League of Three Emperors: Austria-Hungary, Russia, and Germany. Bismarck also maintained good relations with Britain and Italy. So here we have this German power who is negotiating alliances, maintaining relations with all these European nations. But he isolated France diplomatically. The League of Three Emperors was destroyed due to Austria-Hungary and Russia's fight over the Balkans. This left them with the dual alliance between Germany and Austria-Hungary, and then when Italy joined, it was known as the Triple Alliance. So what about Russia? Well, Wilhelm II came to power in Germany in 1888, and in 1890 he dismissed Bismarck. Then Wilhelm refused to renew the reinsurance treaty to keep peace between Russia and Germany. He broke ties, so Russia turns to France and allies with them in 1894. In 1904, Britain and France ally, and in 1907, Britain and Russia ally. This system of bilateral agreements creates the Triple Entente. So we have the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Italy for only a very short time until they switched sides. And the Triple Entente: Great Britain, France, Russia until the Russian Revolution in 1917, and the U.S., who joined pretty late in the war. So you will also need to know the names that these are called: Central Powers and the Allies. The next cause, relatives and rivalries. Relatives and rivalries, you say? Well, yes. Queen Victoria, let's go back to Queen Victoria, a very important woman in England and in Europe, had 9 children. She married them into the royal families of Europe. And if you love royal lineages, take a look into this one. It's very interesting, but I'm not going to read all that to you. The important thing is that Victoria was considered the grandmother of Europe, and among her 42 grandchildren were Wilhelm II of Germany and King George V of England. They were first cousins, and first cousin to both of them was Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. So we've got all these guys, they're cousins, and they are leading these powerful European countries. Wilhelm II was intelligent, but very impulsive. He was born with a withered arm. His left arm was 6 inches shorter than his right as a result of a botched breech birth delivery. This resulted in him having a very difficult childhood, along with the fact that he was struggling for the acceptance of his British relatives, but never received it. Kind of just a family rivalry thing that got out of hand because these men were leaders of Europe. So instead of allying with Britain and learning about British democracy and republicanism, Wilhelm became nationalistic and obsessed with the development of the German military. Our next cause is imperialism. Conflicts over territories created tensions between the nations of Europe. Germany and France fought over Morocco and Alsace-Lorraine, which Germany had seized in the Franco-Prussian War. Germany and Britain were fighting for control of natural resources in Africa and the Pacific. They were looking to expand their economies with these colonies, and dominating the rest of the world was very important for that imperial success. Our next cause is nationalism. And we know that nationalism led to the unification of Italy and Germany in the 19th century, but also created the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary in 1867. And so that dual monarchy was Austria, the German peoples in the west, and the Hungarian peoples in the east. We have one group left over, though, and that's the Southern Slavs that we see here represented by Yugoslavia. This map is post-World War I. So the Pan-Slavist movement was this group of Slavic people that wanted independence from Austria-Hungary to create Yugoslavia. Russia traditionally backed the Slavs and Serbia, which was the most powerful Slavic nation, and that's going to be important later. And so this conflict in the Balkans was called the Powder Keg of the Balkans, and many European leaders were wary of what was happening in this region at the time. And they should have been. June 28, 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Ferdinand was heir to the Austria-Hungarian throne, and he was assassinated in Sarajevo by a group of Serbian separatists. All of Europe was in shock, and initially most sympathized with the Austrians, who were under attack by the separatist group. But when the Russians backed Serbia, Austria-Hungary sought Germany's support. And then the rest of Europe was folded into the war based on their alliances. Our last cause is Arab oil. Oil replaced coal as the fuel of Europe. Germany and England now needed large supplies of oil. Without oil fields of their own, they turned to modern-day Iraq and Iran. Germany was working on the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. They started this the beginning of the 20th century. It would give them access to Baghdad, a city in the Ottoman Empire, where they could establish a Persian Gulf port. This would provide an important link between Germany and its colonies. The railway would also give them quick transport for oil to Germany from German-owned oil fields in Iraq. The railway was not completed by 1914. If it had been, we may have seen a very different result in World War I. And we will find out more about that as we sink our teeth into the events of World War I coming up.